Paul, Louise, and Carla had been waiting for this trip for many months. They planned it in detail more than a year ago. Yes, that's a long time, but when you're just a student, you have to wait a long time as you save little by little. The three of them loved hiking and mountain sports, and so they really wanted to visit the Swiss Alps. For more than a year, they reduced their social life and doubled their working hours, trying to save up the money they needed. Paul studied veterinary science in the mornings and served coffees in the afternoons. He worked at the university's cafeteria, and it's precisely there where he met his best friends, Louise and Carla. They were both a couple, and both studied physiotherapy. Having two friends who are a couple may seem a bit awkward, but in this case, the three of them complemented each other perfectly. Louise and Carla worked in Carla's mom's flower shop. Unlike Paul, Louise and Carla were from wealthy families, but they never received money out of nowhere. They had to work hard to earn every cent they wanted. One August afternoon, the three of them sat down to decide their end-of-studies travel destination. However, they didn't want to go with their other classmates. They wanted to go, only the three of them, and do whatever they wanted. They weighed different options in terms of price, but always ended up talking about going to the Alps. And so, after many days of debate, they made their decision. Their travel destination would be Europe. The three friends felt as if that year would never end. They even stopped hanging out as often since they needed to save up. On Saturdays, they would meet at night to eat dinner and watch a movie. And on weekdays, with classes and work, they had no time to do anything else. However, the months eventually passed, and they finally saw themselves on a plane that 8 hours later would leave them at the airport in Bern, Switzerland. They were ecstatic. The friends had rented out a house in the middle of the mountains. In the photos, it looked incredible, with a nice fireplace and comfortable sofas. Reaching the mountain house would be a bit difficult though. They also had to rent a car and had to spend a few hours driving. Doing that, after being in a plane for so long, was certainly not easy for them. But nothing would take away from them their desire of experiencing the vacation of their dreams. They drank 2 cups of coffee each and continued their journey. The road towards the mountain house was changing a lot the more they advanced. They chose that house knowing that they wanted to be isolated, but didn't imagine to what point they would actually be. They drove through a narrow road for more than an hour. Fortunately, they were carrying a lot of supplies with them, because it seemed that they wouldn't be finding any supermarket or anything of the sort near the mountain house. Once they finally arrived, they were completely impressed by the house. It was huge, similar to those medieval buildings where feudal lords used to live. It was surrounded by a huge garden filled with clay gnomes. And for a moment, Paul thought about how that site looked as if it were taken right out of an American Christmas movie. Beside the mountain house and its beautiful surroundings, the temperature had dropped around 10 degrees. They were finally in their long-desired mountain, and fresh air could be breathed everywhere. As soon as they arrived, they contacted the person in charge of giving them the keys to the house. It was hard finding an area with phone coverage there, but they found it. The real estate agent told them that it would be impossible to give them the keys in person, but that they made sure the group could still get them. They were stored in a compartment locked with a passcode. They introduced the code, and an old keychain fell in their hands. It had a master key, which they could use to open all the doors in the house. Once more, they all felt as if they were in a movie, especially when they finally opened the main entrance. The house was also enormous on the inside. When they rented it, they thought they would only be able to use their rooms at will. It seemed impossible that the real estate company would leave the whole place to them for that price. But it was true. They had the entire house all for themselves. They couldn't believe it, but were so tired that they all wanted to take a shower and then get into bed. The friends slept relatively well, and they all woke up the next morning feeling much better. However, for some reason, they also had nightmares that night. They blamed it on how incredibly tired they were the night before, and with that, they then started their day preparing a good breakfast. They had planned to follow a simple mountain route that day, as a warm-up, and also to get familiar with the surrounding area. However, when they were initially planning their daily itinerary, they thought they would use that first day to meet others living in the mountain, or maybe other people in the nearest town. They didn't expect to be absolutely isolated in that mountain. However, the group simply accepted their situation and didn't let that ruin their first day of vacation. They changed into their sports clothes and localized the map of their first route on the phone. They hoped the slight coverage they were having would allow them to follow the app's directions. That was their only guide. To not lose any important items, they decided to leave the key in the passcode compartment, where they picked it up when they arrived. The trail they found as soon as they started their route was nothing short of incredible. As they were going up, the sights were getting more and more awesome. The beautiful nature of the place was offering the group a truly fantastic landscape. It caught their attention that it seemed that nobody had walked around that area in a long time. It was strange since that road was perfectly accessible, and the route was pretty simple to follow. At first, the phone was working perfectly, but as they were advancing, they were losing signal. However, they didn't let that stop them. The trail was easily visible, so not getting out of it was enough to get lost. On the way, the group also saw some sort of cabins which caught their attention. There was one every few meters, all of them looking exactly the same. Paul, the most curious of the three, didn't hesitate about getting a bit off the route to try to get into one of those cabins. But it was impossible. It had a huge lock on the door. He tried to get into other cabins, but saw they were all locked as well, so he finally gave up. All the locks seemed to be the same, and they were just like the ones they had at the house's entrance. However, they didn't give that much importance, and kept walking until they reached a fork on the trail. They stopped and started to debate about what to do next. The phone had no signal, and if they kept going forward, they were at risk of getting lost. Louise and Carla preferred to go back and study the way to follow another route the next day. Instead, Paul preferred to continue the adventure. And so, at the end, the couple won, and they all went back to the house following the same trail they used to go up the mountain. They were a bit disappointed. That was the easiest route, so if they didn't find a way to navigate around it, they wouldn't be able to do anything. The group received a nasty surprise when they got back. The house's entrance was wide open. Louise was the last one to get out, so the other friends scolded him for his carelessness. However, he was completely sure that he closed it. They checked their belongings, and fortunately none of them were missing. However, weirdly enough, they did find strange footprints. Paul claimed they seemed to belong to some sort of fox, but he wasn't sure. After that, each one took a shower. Then they prepared their lunch and spent the rest of the afternoon playing games and talking. They tried to call the real estate company a couple of times to see if they could help them out with the coverage issue. However, they were dumbfounded when an operator told them that that number no longer belonged to any customer. It was impossible. How could an entire real estate business just drop their phone number like that? This really got the friends worried. That agent was the only contact they had in the area, and taking into account how isolated they were, it was extremely important to have at least one contact. But now, they had nobody. However, despite how they were all feeling, they found something that night which helped them feel better. A map of the entire area. It had a few markings and crosses here and there, but it was perfect for them to navigate the area and finally do all the hiking they wanted. They went to sleep, and the nightmares came back. The three dreamed about wolves. The beasts were everywhere and then attacked them. However, what was the possibility of three people living together, having the exact same dream? In the morning, while everyone was eating breakfast, each one thought the other two were lying and pranking him or her. The group then grabbed their newly found map and went into the mountain. Everything was going well at first. The scenery was incredible, and the difficulty of the route was gradually increasing. They were so happy doing what they enjoyed doing the most. However, the first conflict soon ensued. The map seemed to be pretty old, and it wasn't very clear at certain points. That's when the three started to argue again. Paul was an adventurer, and he wanted to continue, while his two friends wanted to be more cautious. At the end, Paul decided to continue alone, while Louise and Carla decided to go back. The couple wouldn't stop worrying about their friend. They were afraid of him getting lost and not knowing how to come back, but they also knew how stubborn Paul was with things like that, so they had to let him go. When they got back to the house, the entrance was wide open again, but they had witnessed how Paul locked it correctly before they left. It was so strange. That was a huge gate, so it wasn't possible for the wind or a mountain animal to open it. And once more, they found strange footsteps all over the house. That really got Louise and Carla worried. The phone number of the real estate company was still not working, and they couldn't connect to the internet either. That place started to turn from amazing to really scary, but for the time being, the most important thing was waiting for Paul to come back safe and sound. High up in the mountain, Paul was enjoying the wonderful scenery. However, when he decided it was time to go back, a sudden change in weather caught him by surprise. Out of the blue, a heavy snowstorm broke out. He tried to go faster, since he didn't want to be in the middle of the mountain after getting dark. However, he was struggling to find a way back, since everything was now covered in snow. At the house, Louise and Carla looked at the sky even more worried. They considered going out to look for Paul, but they couldn't go very far without getting lost too, so they decided to keep waiting. They kept looking through the window, but Paul wasn't appearing. The young man was completely lost. He didn't know where to go, and could barely move his muscles due to the cold. But then, he saw what seemed to be a pretty large dog. In the middle of that storm, he couldn't distinguish well if it was a dog or a fox or even a wolf, but he thought that if he followed that animal, he could find a warm place to take refuge in. And amazingly, it was as if the animal was reading his thoughts. Every now and then, when Paul wasn't sure about what he was doing, the dog-like creature would turn its head around and look at him, as if saying, "Follow me." Then something incredible happened. The creature stepped in front of one of those strange cabins, and the door opened. Then it stepped aside, so that Paul could go in. There was some sort of bed in there, as well as a lit fireplace. Paul didn't understand what was going on, but he saw no other alternative but to stay there. But if he chose to stay outside in the snowstorm, he wouldn't survive either. The cabin was filled with crosses, as well as photographs of the mountain. It kind of looked like an altar, and he didn't know why, but he felt a deep sense of peace once inside the cabin. In contrast, things at the mountain house were getting worse. Louise and Carla locked themselves in the living room with the fireplace lit. It all started when they suddenly started to hear noises all around the house. It's as if someone was wrecking the entire place. They wanted to get out to see what was happening. But when Louise got up, he looked through the window and saw how the front of the house was filled with wolves. The couple were terrified. It looked like those beasts wanted to get into the house. They were hitting their heads on the door and were howling at the top of their lungs. That's when they thought that maybe one of the wolves managed to get into the house and was wrecking things upstairs. That's why they decided to lock themselves in the living room. They blocked the door with everything they found and cuddled in the sofa waiting and hoping for everything to pass. They couldn't believe that their dream vacation was turning out like that. Not to mention they were worried sick about their friend Paul. They thought that at that point he was probably dead, frozen under the snowstorm. Everything was going horribly, and they couldn't call anybody for help. At one point, Louise and Carla remembered that the car they rented was still in the garage. They thought that if they managed to get in it, they could drive off and look for help. The roads were covered in snow, but the car was equipped with snow chains as well, so they had a chance there. The couple tried to reach an agreement, but all the options available to them were dangerous. At the end, they decided to go their separate ways. Louise would get to the car to look for help, while Carla would stay and wait in case Paul came back. They said their goodbyes, as if that was the last time they would ever see each other again. They said "I love you" to one another, and as he could, Louise rushed from the living room's door to the stairs leading to the garage. He managed to get in the car and broke open the gate with it. He didn't want to waste any time. Unfortunately, he didn't take into account that doing so would give a way for the wolves to get into the house. Louise pressed the pedal to the metal, but immediately after had to slam on the brakes. In the middle of the front yard, surrounded by wolves, was an elderly woman. Her hair was completely white, and all of her clothes were black. With her left hand, she held a huge stick, which she used as a cane. Louise didn't know what to do, but he certainly didn't want to run her over. So arming himself with courage, Louise approached the old woman. He rolled down the window once he got close enough to her. The woman had dark and very wrinkly skin. She was looking to the ground, but addressed Louise by saying, "That is my home. Why did you go in?" Louise, dumbfounded, told her that they were just there on vacation and just wanted to do some hiking. Here, of all places? "Yeah, of course. Isn't this area famous for that?" The woman nodded and told him that if he followed the road, he would eventually bump into mountain rangers guarding the zone. However, Louise wasn't trusting her very much. What was an old woman doing all alone, in the middle of nowhere, and under a snowstorm no less? However, having no other options, he still accelerated and kept driving, set on finding help. Through the rearview mirror, he saw how the woman advanced towards the mountain house. Louise prayed that all the doors were locked and that strange woman wouldn't get in. As he was thinking that, another pack of wolves suddenly appeared in front of the vehicle. That was the end of Louise. He swerved trying to avoid them, but ended up driving off a cliff. The wolves soon found him at the bottom and completely devoured him. Not even his bones were left after that. Meanwhile, in the mountain, Paul fell asleep in that strange cabin. He was so tired that he couldn't stay awake. However, everything was turning out kind of well for him. He thought that his friends were safe at the mountain house. Worried about him, but safe. Paul didn't know how wrong he was. Carla was shaking in fear, huddled in a corner of the living room. A long time had passed since she last heard the wolves, and that made her feel even more anxious. She knew something bad was going on. She could almost sense it. A few seconds later, she heard someone started to hit the door that led to the garage stairs. She thought it could be Louise. However, she didn't dare to get out of the living room. Soon enough, someone started to hit the living room's door, and it wasn't Louise. If it was him, he would be yelling her name. Whomever it was hitting the door with a wooden object. Then she could hear wolf barks filling the place. They were all there behind the door. Carla couldn't stop shaking and was struggling not to faint. Fear was invading her with each passing second. There was no escape. She got away from the door as much as she could, but seeing how the door was shaking, she knew her end was near. In a few minutes, whomever was behind the door managed to break it down, but when it opened, Carla didn't see anybody there. A creepy silence reigned for a few seconds, and after a loud thud on the floor, a huge pack of wolves rushed into the living room, pouncing on Carla. Nothing was left of her body, only her hair, boots, and hardly anything else. On the other side of the door, that old woman with white hair now had a huge smile on her face. Only one remained. Paul, who kept sleeping innocently, ignorant of everything that had happened to his friends. And surprisingly, hours passed without anything bad happening to him. It was as if that strange animal from before had saved his life. Paul woke up after feeling the first rays of sunlight. The snowstorm had died out, so he tried to go back to the mountain house to tell his friends that he was fine. He couldn't wait to share his adventure with them and see their reactions. Paul walked for more than 3 hours, but he eventually reached the house and was startled to discover how the garage door was completely broken, and the car wasn't inside. He started to feel nervous. Everything around there was wrecked, as if an earthquake had just taken place. Paul rushed in. There were footprints everywhere, and 2 doors in the middle of the hall. He followed the tracks to the living room, and there, he saw whatever was left of Carla. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked everywhere, but couldn't see any more clues besides those footprints. There was no sign of Louise, so he imagined that he took the car. But why would he leave Carla all alone, thought Paul, and how would Paul even get out of there? He checked the entire house looking for anything that would help him understand what was going on. And then, he saw a bunch of photographs he didn't notice before, all of them showing an old woman surrounded by wolves. Those photos were all over the house, both inside and out. Always the same woman and the same wolves. Paul pondered about the dog-looking creature that saved him the previous night. It was similar looking to the wolves in the pictures, but he was sure it wasn't one of them. As he kept on pondering, Paul headed to the kitchen, which was the last room he hadn't checked. And there, he saw her, the same woman from the photographs. She was sitting down looking through the window. "I was sure there was one left, and my puppies are still hungry." You should have known that the mountain wouldn't protect you forever. Paul understood that she was the one responsible for Carla's death. And then, a few seconds later, Paul was devoured by those beasts as the woman laughed and laughed in manic joy.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.